We got it?
We haven't tested the mics yet.
Oh, we're doing it. Sounds like we're in there.
Oh my gosh.
Everybody hear everything? Yeah. All right.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here today. I have worked with David since the mid-90s, and I try to avoid doing the math, but I was in my 20s, and we have a long history of working on a lot of museum projects, gallery exhibitions, studio visits. We're both big talkers, so there have been a lot of conversations, and I want to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to have a conversation, probably like a lot of conversations we've had in the past, and it's just a wonderful experience. I love what I do, and I work with living artists, and one of the great joys of that is visiting artists' studios, talking to them about their work, and some of those conversations are private as artists are kind of struggling to figure out what's next and what they're doing, and then others are very much about finished bodies of work and what those are about. So I hope we will entertain you with some behind the scenes examples and everything that's going on. But the way I want to tackle this is chronologically. We're going to move from the early 80s up to the present. And David's work has been really exciting to follow because it has fallen into and it has evolved through these areas of people and places, and stylistically it's changed since the early 80s to now. And it's very exciting to look at those changes and to follow it. It's exciting for museums, it's exciting for scholars, and of course it's exciting for collectors and very exciting for those of us that work with David. Here we go. I'm gonna let David talk about this painting. The title of this talk has to do with inspirations, and I wanted to have a good example of David's early work before we get into Grassy Lake, and this is one of my favorite paintings. It hangs at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's hung there for decades. Almost every visit I've ever gone on to the Met, I see this wonderful painting. And when I thought about this talk and I look at this, I think about, even at this early stage in your career, what inspired you. The title of the painting is The Conservatory, and it's of David's wife, Jan, who is most certainly an inspiration to his life and his career and his art, and nature. And when I look at it, I think about people and places and kind of how your career has evolved around people and places. So could you tell us about this painting?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that I've been hearing about Cassetta and you know, through a lot of y'all over the years, and I'm very honored to, you know, I don't think I qualified to even talk to you guys until more recently. That's good news and bad news. But, you know, I've always heard great things about it, and I really have always studied all the other Texas artists all through time, and my teachers were their students, and so it just passed along. And I think that probably that if there's any artist, one thing I felt kind of proud of is that I felt like if there was anybody who was in the rung of the ladder of those people, it'd probably be me, because I was so close to it. And I painted here, and I didn't leave. You know, that was probably, you know, I think there were some people that said you should leave, either because they didn't like me, I guess, or maybe because they thought that would help. But I went to school up in New York and stuff, and it just, you know, it wasn't that. It was great. I was there for a year, and I learned a lot, right from Garland, Texas to New York, with a little SMU in between. So, you know, it was great, but it probably wasn't my place. Anyway, I just wanted to thank Talley and thank you guys for having me here and helping me out. That woman in that painting has been, you know, around for 40 years of my life. We've been married for that long, and she has been. I was just on a dinner with some people, and they said, how's your wife? And I said, you know, I would be, I can't say the word I said, but I said I would be not in good shape without her. I mean, she has been everything to me. And the woman went, we know that. You know, like you would be a mess without her. And so this is a painting of her walking through the San Francisco Conservatory. And I kind of did some drawings. I still have the drawing of it. And it's just all these little black and white drawings of that with little notes of color, you know, like certain kinds of green that I was seeing, and her outfit that she was wearing at the time. So it was this painting, and it was in the Met. They had it in the Met in that show called The Age of Anxiety. I guess I was not. I was what we used to be before anxiety or something. But anyway, it was just about figure in nature. And I think all the things I've tried to do were the same things that all those earlier Texas guys did, which was, and ladies, was the same things that have been going on through the Renaissance, you know, figure and landscape, portrait, still life, history paintings, all those kind of things. Nothing seemed to be on purpose. There was like, oh, now I'm going to do this, and then this will be a good transition into this, you know. And I was listening to Sue. She is genius, by the way. So the difference between this talk and that talk is like, I started to go, oh, hell no, I'm not going to do this. No, Sue, I will put a name tag on you that says David Bates. You just need to wear this coat. You'll have a little explaining to do. Went to Amsterdam, I don't know. But she did a great job, so now here we are. And the difference between our historians is that they went through a world of school, and that's their life. It's like somebody who loves food, and they just study all different kinds of food. And then you got a guy that does really good chicken fried steaks. And that's what he knows and talks about. So it's kind of limited. Anyway.
Okay, so speaking of chicken fried steak, there's a story that you tell about when you were at SMU and you were encouraged to get on a bus.
Right.
Could you tell that story? Because the early work of yours, we would put into the, art historians would put into the category of genre paintings, painting everyday life before it got to specific places. And how did that come about as a young artist in graduate school or coming out of graduate school, and the decision? I think that's a very defining moment when it was not looking at New York, but actually looking in your own backyard. And could you tell that story about the bus?
Yeah, Roger Winter was my teacher at SMU, and he had, like I said, had taken me by Otis Dozier's place, and he'd take me by to meet a lot of the other artists. I think Dan Wingren was there at that time, and DeForest Judd was there at that time. So there was a whole bunch of y'all's people in that group. And the people that y'all have collected all this time. And, you know, I just saw that sort of really interesting painters and stuff, and would talk to them on that level. And so Roger saw me suffering in class. I was drawing with colored pencils of the model, but mainly I was drawing all the people, you know, drawing the model, you know, like the football players, like really interested in the nude girl. And, you know, just it was like all these characters, you know. And he said, okay, get your stuff, you're out. And I'm like, oh man, I just got a scholarship. You know. So anyway, he took me down and he took me outside, and we were like leaving the school, and he put me on a bus. I'm like, okay. Wow, this is going different than I thought. And he put me on a bus, and he said, and he put all the money in there, and he said, it's going to go all the way around the city, everywhere, and it comes back here. And I just want you to do what you were doing in there of everything you see on the bus. And I'm like, okay. And so that really is how all this started, that one little trip. And then it was all these colored pencil drawings. He put them up on the wall. And all these other guys in my class could draw like Ang. They looked like Degas drawings, really amazing drawings by these other students in there. And he put mine up and he started raving about mine. And I'm like going, oh no, man, this isn't good. They didn't like me to begin with. And he was just saying that this is somebody who's finding what you do in art. What you guys are doing is finding what other people have done in art. You know, you're able to capture these abilities, but you need to figure out what you're going to apply them to. And this guy's figured that out. Well, Roger figured it out. I think Roger did that to all those people too. He figured out some lane for all those people. That's why he was such a good teacher. Anyway, that's that story.
We move on. Around the same time, you transition from, and when we say genre paintings and the everyday, from that bus ride, David did incredible works of subjects that you might be familiar with: barbecue, rodeo, fireworks stands, state fair, corny dog, all of these great scenes of everyday life that you'd find in our own backyard. But something very pivotal happened. You, in the early 80s, you went to a place called Grassy Lake, which is a private lake in Arkansas, 350 years old. And it was a big discovery for you. And the painting that I've pulled up, which a lot of you may be familiar with, is Ed Walker Cleaning Fish from 1982. And this is kind of the beginning of David transitioning from the everyday genre paintings of the area around here to a special place outside of your own backyard. So how can you talk to us about?
Claude took me there. Claude Albritton took me there. So there you go. Claude has done some great things. For those, he was really very sweet to take me there and share this with me, really just to go fishing. But I think he knew by looking at the stuff that you probably would want to paint some stuff. And so, and he put me with Ed Walker, who was a sharecropper on this property when it started. So he goes way back. And he was like a grandfather to me. I knew him for about 12 to 15 years, I guess, of going there. I kept going back and seeing him. And I didn't have a grandfather. They all died before I got there, but to know him. But he was, you couldn't have had a better grandfather. He was like this old sage. He talked different. He looked different. Everything about him was wonderful. I mean, I was just always, and so I remember doing this painting, and I came back and I tried drawing him. He'd get up and move. You know, he'd kind of like, oh, and he'd just get up and move. So I finally there was a poster. This is at the Dallas Museum, and they did a poster for Texas Homes or something, and I took him the poster, and I said, hey, man, what do you think? And he's like, I said, it's you. And he goes, well, you got the shoes right. All right. That's what I was going for. So he said, that's supposed to be me. And I went, yeah. He goes, why would you do that? Why'd you do that painting? And I said, well, you know, you got that picture of Kennedy on your mantle, and it's like that. It's like a hero. And he was like, oh, okay. Yeah, all right. You sit further away on the boat. This is weird. So, but he got it, I think, but it was like a little too much for him. It's like, I don't understand why you would do that. But the people who got the painting, I think about 7 or 8 people purchased the painting, which was about $7,000 at the time for the Dallas Museum. And I would have loved for him to seen it in there, you know. But anyway, we had a great relationship that was not about art. So that's Ed. And we probably need to speed up, too, on these pictures. Okay.
We're going to. So you get into...
Birds next.
Birds are next. Birds are next. So talk about, and I'm going to go through these rather quickly. This is a painting at the Fort Worth Modern Art Museum of a night heron. Tell us about Grassy Lake. And again, what motivated you to want to paint it? I mean, you went there to fish, but what inside of you made you think of, because I would see that, or someone who isn't an artist might see that and say, I could never paint this. This is just so incredible. But something inside of you said, I want to tackle this. It had to be a challenging subject.
I think
in a
the
way.
place, I painted, and this usually would happen, I'd paint something that would look very naturalistic for me, you know, not this. And then I would look at that and it just looked boring. It looked like a bad painting that anyone would do. And so then I would try to figure out a way to make it more interesting, to do something to it that would make it, you know, more mine, I guess. And I realized that I had this funky drawing style, so everything always started with the black and white drawing from the little drawing and the notes that I took, and then the paintings would be, these things were probably 8 feet tall, so they would be drawn out all over this canvas, and they would change going from the drawing, and then painted in like a coloring book, really. It would start usually at the top and just sort of go down like that. But the first one you saw, the reason that I saw this undergrowth and all these little you know, pieces of lilies and duckweed and various different growth at the swamp, and sticks and all this trash that was in there, it all looked beautiful. So I just painted that bird the same way, you know, and he's got, he looks like somebody says, that bird's got pants and a hat on. And I said, well, he looked like he had pants and a hat on. It's a night hare, and they kind of sit like that. They're kind of little football shapes, you know. But, and then it gave me an excuse. Making them that big, if I'd made all that stuff real small, I wouldn't have had any room to paint. You know, it's like tiny. But if they're big, the chest of that bird was like big, like 4 feet tall. So it was like an abstract painting. You got to do an abstract painting inside of a bird that looked like bird feathers. So I got to do all the things that I liked. I always loved abstract painting, but I just didn't. I wanted to see a story. I wanted you to be able to relate to it the same way I do. And sometimes in an abstract painting, you know, you go, it's a gray square and a blue square, and you go, and the artist is like going, right, and you're like, okay. And so these I wanted to. I think being from here, and having the background from here, you know, where you'd have. I think the bravest thing in the world was an abstract artist in Texas, you know, because I was used to people going, what the hell's that supposed to be? You know, and so. And I still got that, but at least there was, you know, in a painting like that one of the bird. I've got these down here so I can see them, but it's kind of cool. But the painting of the bird is just, you know, it's huge. It's like a movie, you know. It's like 8 feet this way and 6.5 feet that way, and it was the most encyclopedic pictures of this lake, and it got so perfect and so inclusive that. It was getting too much. And it was a real closed set. You know, Grassy Lake was like a stage set that was Baroque. And so when I went on to the coast right after that, I just quit that. And a lot of times I would have to hate paintings in order to move on to something new. I didn't really in this case, but a lot of times I did. And in the coast pictures, it was like the opposite. It was like a minimalist painting. It was like, you know, you had sky, water, sand, and then and your characters, your people. And, you know, there's very few women paintings, and these women are pretty, they're like Michelangelo women. You know, they're a little bit buff, you know. And reason I didn't paint women is because y'all are so beautiful, and I always felt like, oh man, I'm just gonna mess this up. But if it was a guy, I don't care about messing that up at all. You know, I mean, we're already messed up. You know? I heard some guy say, us guys are like salesmen, you know, to women. We're like salesmen with a really faulty product.
All right.
We know we are, but
Right.
we try to, hey, you know, what? Pretty good, right? And so when I was painting guys, it was always like I didn't have a problem with it. And the reason I painted these guys with their shirts off, I've heard all kinds of, when I die, it's going to be a whole lot of stories about that, I'm sure. You know, it's like, well, you didn't like men with their shirts off. The deal is, I just thought that and I've been there, It's hot, but when you're out there, it's like more vulnerable against all that water and all that ocean and all that stuff that lives in there. It makes them look, has more vulnerability. The guy with the, it's coming up here, the snake, with the guy with the shark line, I think it's called, that one. That guy is got a shark on a rope, on a hook. You just take a big piece of meat, horse meat, I think they used to use, and throw it in the water and hold on. And he's on a jetty, but now he's got some shark. He doesn't know what's on there, but it's about to pull him off that rock. And so the fear of what's in that, when I used to go to the coast, you didn't know what was in there. And I caught a shark one time. This is like how I got started fishing. I was fishing on a party boat, and I had the rod under my arm, and I'm kind of like this, little kid, bent over a pole, and I've got something on there real big, and I'm like doing all this thing, about to break their stuff and everything. And I reel up this hammerhead shark that's about probably 7 feet long. And I'm like, whoa. And then over the top of my shoulder comes this arm and a guy with a pistol going, doosh, doosh, shooting this thing full of holes. And I'm like, this is the best thing ever. Oh my God, I'm catching this monster, and he's shooting the monster. This is great. I love this fishing stuff. And it's pretty much like that to this day. I don't really shoot little trout and stuff, but I love doing all that stuff. And the unknown of what's in the ocean and stuff, I think, was what that painting's about. And what I love about, Homer, Winslow Homer paintings. I mean, that shark, that painting of the black guy on the boat with the sharks around him and stuff. I mean, it's all that. That's the kind of stuff that we see when we're young and go, just like that event with the shark, and the shooting. You see that painting and you're like, whoa, that's awesome. That's cool. That's what painting should be about. That's the best. And he was another guy that fished and painted too, so that was cool. Anyway.
Speaking of Winslow Homer and Hartley, I think that a lot of people that look at your work recognize or interested in this. You are definitely tackling the notion of man versus nature. And there's all the fun, but there's also the serious side of, like you said, the danger beneath the water, the danger. We had Cottonmouth up, and we have the snake going up after the egret's nest. Grassy Lake was a treacherous place with alligators and all sorts of things, but there's a real transition in your Gulf Coast work to the heroic figure. And I think of Hartley, and where the figure is quite dominant in the composition, the choice of making that. And Winslow Homer, there's an incredible show at the Met right now. Gulfstream is the name of the show, and it's the painting that David's referring to is titled Gulfstream with the sharks around the boat. But it really is recognizing that these artists that you look to, like Hartley and Homer, that fishing was extremely dangerous. That it's an extremely dangerous profession, and it is, I think you've always been drawn to that battle of nature and humans, and that's very much what's going on in some of these works, don't you think?
Sure. I mean, that's what the figure, I think when I was at Grassy, Ed was it. It was the only figure, really. I mean, he's the guy that I went fishing with and hung out with. There was hardly anyone ever there, which was great. But when I went to the coast, you had a cast of, a ton of different kind of people, And the deal is a lot of artists paint like movie stars and famous people and queens and kings and stuff like that through history. And I wasn't around all that many kings and queens. But I think the idea for me was I like painting working people of the coast. And more than being about Galveston or Florida or, Chesapeake or something like that, it was more just that. It's like when people say, is that Galveston or is that Port Arthur? It's a painting. just a painting of the coast, of people working the coast. It's really not so much about those places, but I think if you're from Galveston, it is. So, you know, it's like you have a different motive for doing things than your collector might. And stories that people bring to these paintings are awesome. You know, I had a painting of this rakish looking dude with a cigarette in New Orleans, and this guy said, "Let me tell you about your painting." And I went, "Okay." And he said, "This is a guy that goes to Beau Rivage over here a lot. He wins more than he loses. He's been married 4 times, but he'll only talk about 2 of them." Men like him just as much as ladies do, but he's not so good on either one of them. And I was like, wow, this is way better than my story about this guy. So, and that's the kind of things that's in these different pictures, is that you have people look at them and have all these different thoughts of their experiences. They bring their experiences to it, the times they've been to the coast or what they know about that subject. And I think a lot of people who've just never been around this element before either think it's crazy, like he just got to be making this stuff up, or they just don't get it. And that's cool. You know, there's a lot of stuff I don't get. You know, I mean, but you know, there's paintings like this. This one here is like, it's right out of the Renaissance. I mean, it's like right out of the, you know, you have all those great scenes from the surgery picture, the Rembrandt surgery thing, to the, I had a painting of a guy feeding dogs, right? It's just a guy in the middle of all these dogs around him. And somebody said, well, what influenced that? And thinking where I was when that happened. And I went, Mantegna. And they went, you mean Montana? I went, no, Mantegna. He did a painting of it was Saint Sebastian, and he was hung up, and all these guys were shooting arrows at him. You know, that's how they martyred him. And they were all around this guy in the center. So it was like it was the same kind of composition. The person's like, okay, that's what I thought. You know, so there was compositions and all these things that were influenced, I would say, by some painting throughout history.
So here's a shot of your studio, and just showing, we're going to transition into still life painting and a little bit of sculpture, but just the setting of where you work with the different elements.
Yeah, that's kind of a Hartley sort of thing. You know, I love that guy. I mean, I went and did a lecture, a panel thing in New York about Hartley at the Met, and one guy did a whole thing just on the gay part of Hartley, and I'm like so looking at the paintings that I'd missed. I mean, I know that, but it was just like such a whatever concept for me, and his whole part of the talk was that, and I'm like, but look at that paint.
Yeah.
It doesn't know what's going on. It's just awesome, you know. And so seeing those figures, those fishermen that he painted in Maine, in a really, you know, just massive compositions and massive sort of bodies and stuff, were just incredible looking. They're folk art, and I always have loved folk art. It's so you know, elemental. It's so everybody can see it. It's like there's no reason you should like it or not like it. It's not led by any art history or anything. It's led by, and Hartley's looked like that.
So speaking of Hartley, and Hartley had a lot of hardships in his life, and a lot of those fishermen that he painted, there's a lot of emotion and tragedy around his subjects in Maine, and we transition. There's a fascinating transition from David's Gulf Coast painting to his paintings of Katrina and the storm. And here is an installation shot from the Fort Worth Modern Art Museum, and you can see And it also gives a nice perspective of scale. On the left-hand side, you can see the cleaning table and the painting from the Phillips collection that are just pure Gulf Coast from the late 80s, early 90s, and then you transition to the early 2000s with Katrina, and to what I see are the same people under very different circumstances. Seems so natural that David would paint Katrina because these were the everyday, the fishermen, the people of a place, but they were struck by really great tragedy. And if you could kind of touch upon, we're jumping about 10 years from the paintings on the left to the paintings that are facing us, but there's a whole body of still life work in the middle. And sculpture, but they are connected. There is a real connection between the Gulf Coast paintings of the 80s and early 90s and the Katrina paintings. And I'm going to show an image of your studio where we have a painting you saw at the Modern, sitting there on the floor, and then all of those studies of the individuals. So if you can kind of share with us what prompted you, what moved you to paint this subject.
I'd been going to New Orleans for about 30 years before Katrina happened, so I knew it for all the people who lived there. I had a dealer, Arthur Roger, there. I mean, there was a lot of connection to that place, and I went there for all the same reasons that everybody does: the food and the music, and and the people who make that food and that music, and have made the bricks that built all those buildings and all that stuff. All the culture that came there from Africa were these black people. And Katrina, I had my dealer in California said that I did all these Katrina paintings, and he said, "Are there ones with white people?" And I went, "Did you not see that on TV? It's New Orleans. It was all black people. That's who was left there." And then they got shipped out in about a week period of time to somewhere other than there. It was crazy. And so when that was happening, I watched it like y'all did on TV at first. And those drawings that you saw were just done, they were little drawings and they got to be bigger. I just figured that's not big enough. Those subjects, that's just not covering the pain that's in here. And then they got bigger and more powerful. The one that one, I remember Yale University ended up getting that painting. And I think I said in an article, I couldn't get into Yale University in a million years, so I'm thrilled that one of my paintings did. And the director of the museum wrote back, "Well, you've been accepted to Yale 3 times. We have 3 of your paintings." And then I ended up, just as a lark, I ended up on a fishing trip with him, with the head of the museum, on just a fishing trip where he's like sleeping like 2 feet away from me, so we had a lot of chance to talk about this kind of stuff. He was a great guy, Jock Reynolds, terrific dude. Everybody hates him because anytime he comes to your city, in every city, Sue's like going, "I know him." He would come in and charm everybody, and you have people that went to Yale that are giving paintings to your museum, but now he's all of a sudden intercepted that. And now you're going to give them to Yale. Sue's like going, yeah, sounds familiar.
I'm so glad when he retired.
Yeah, he just did. That's true. That's right. Anyway, so the thing about these paintings is that they're about such horrible stuff and such pain, but I'm having to try to paint them and make the painting beautiful. And that was an odd deal. They weren't particularly fun to paint. And I remember when I was painting them at first, I just felt like I was a reporter. It wasn't like something that I thought, man, this is going to look great in the breakfast nook. I had no idea anyone would ever want any of them, but I just felt like I had to do them. And the concept of a white guy painting black subject was, Willie Birch was when I first got to New Orleans 30, 40 years ago, he had seen one of these paintings like of Ed Walker, and I said, hey, dude, I had somebody come to me and they said that they thought that it was wrong that I was painting black people. And he said, who said that? That a white person should do that? And he said, who said that? And I said, it was a white critic. And he was brought up in the, in the struggle during the 60s. And he went, well, I got two problems with that. White critic. Willie's a character. Willie will tell you what time it is. He'll break it down for his white brother, And so he said, here's the deal, man. Here's the deal, bro. You have handled this with grace and beauty, and anybody who handles this in respect, handles it in those ways, how bad, I'm thrilled for you. We don't have a lot of people doing that. So you are more than welcome. I'm so appreciative. And I thought, what a sweet thing to say. And so he okayed it for me 30 years later to do these paintings. So I didn't really think about it, but then I had people, a very small group really that ever mentioned anything about it. So, I know where I stand on the topic, so it's like, you can say whatever you want to say about me being a racist or something, but it's like the same reason like you paint those guys with their shirts off. Yeah, that's right. Okay, whatever. You can say, in the history of art, they're going to be saying a lot of stuff, and so you just go, man, rolling that grave a little faster.
Well, I think that what was so powerful, if you saw these paintings in person, the one we just looked at is now at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And there were comments about it and art criticism written positively that David's paintings of this subject could capture something that a photograph could never capture. That there were so many artists and individuals capturing Katrina through documentary photography, but the painting carried a level of emotion and psychology and connection to the place and the feeling. And for those that see these paintings in person, the connection to the subject is quite powerful. And here we have a triptych that was acquired by the Kemper Museum of Art. Again, just the people, the faces, and I think this was based on the Superdome, the individuals that were just packed into it, and the anguish and the pain and the lack of attention and care that was being given. And I think David really showed attention and care. And I remember when you were painting these, it was a time that you were very upset about the subject, and it was powerful, a very powerful body of work.
It's a little bit like those history, and I'd never painted history paintings, and so Raflin Medusa was not the guy, he wasn't there,
Right.
The Guernica paintings, Picasso wasn't there to see that, but he could imagine through photographs and through stories that people told you of what it was like to have been there or the meaning of it, and then you can do the painting from there. So, I wasn't there when it was still flooded. That cleared out. They wouldn't let you in. And before I got up there, I think I went about 8 or 9 times during that period, and none of them were during the flood, but I could see what it would look like. You can see the lines on the houses and all the stuff where the water line would be. So it was easy to portray that.
So we're going to transition real quickly to sculpture and relief painting, and this is an installation at the Nasher Sculpture Center, and what you see hanging on the wall is a relief entitled Moonflowers, and it's very difficult to capture an image, these three-dimensional reliefs where David was cutting wood and creating essentially a canvas on wood, but it has dimension. They're quite heavy. They come out 6 to 8 inches at least. And that was the beginning of moving into sculpture. And here is another catalpa that is completely three-dimensional with painting and wood and found objects. And these works, you can kind of talk a little bit about how you moved from the picture plane of a stretched canvas to a three-dimensional plane that hangs on the wall to then actually getting off the wall into polychrome bronze with a sunflower and thistle sculpture also at the Nasher during that exhibition.
There was a painting of most of that, of the Catalpa painting. There was a painting of that, and there was a painting of the moonflowers. And in probably '92, I was painting so thickly that it was, you know, it was getting kind of crazy. So I thought, well, I'll just start sticking stuff on there and paint on top of that, you know, to make it come out more. Somehow, you know, the thick paint that I use is like, if you want something to be super white, you just need to put more white. Whoa, you know, like pile more red on there, it'll make it redder. You know, that was my mentality. It's like a kid. This whole thing is very, you kind of go through life as a child where you're always just like just amazed by stuff all the time. Not good. It's a little Forrest Gumpish, you know. It's, but I'm always just looking at stuff, you know, and so that it made sense to me that if you wanted something to be whiter, you just stick more white on it, or maybe a board and then put white paint on top of that. And so those paintings of the flowers and all were just built out from the wall, and then they were getting so heavy that I thought, well, let's just take that stuff and put it out here in the space. But then the space was not great for me because then you couldn't control what was behind it. You know, so you'd always go back to painting again. You know, you couldn't control, there's some dude standing back there, you're in my thing. You know, so you'd want to get him out of there, and the way to do that is going back to 2 dimensions again. These are the paintings of like, there was a whole group, this kind of going back to Ed Walker. I mean, me and him both used to sit like that, but it's like, you draw this and paint this. They were kind of in cubist colors and made in cardboard and all that. And then pretty soon, wood. And then I had, at Walla Walla, I went to work at Walla Walla Foundry, and it was like a play place. It was like artists would go there from New York or wherever, and they loved it because they would have a scrap yard of steel. I would go out there and just dig stuff, throw it off the edge of it, and we'd pick it all up and take it back to the studio and just pile it up. And we'd have wood like that, interesting pieces of everything, and we'd just make stuff out of all that. And so it was a playground for artists. I had the best time in my whole career working with I had a woodworking guy that I could make stuff like that and just kind of hot glue it together. And then he would be like, so it's hard to take two things and just make that stay. You know, we're gonna have to insert it in here in a little bit. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, I said, well, can I help you? And he goes, okay, now, if you help me, it's gonna cost way more. And he was a furniture maker, so he took all this stuff and would make those sculptures. It was great to see that kind of come to pass, because I couldn't have done that. And that's what they did at the foundry. They would burn that out and make a bronze.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of trace through for a second the magnolia, and we're going to get to a sculpture of a magnolia just to illustrate this.
That's one of the beginning ones. That was probably in '85 or '86.
Right. And then the magnolia evolves to a painting, another painting.
It kind of follows me around. I painted a magnolia. We can go through them, but I painted a magnolia every year since the early '80s. My mom loved magnolias, and she was a flower arranger. Another reason you see all these flower arrangements is I was carrying her flower arrangements to the garden show when I was like 6, you know. And be careful with that, it's very fragile, you know, all that stuff. So it was her fault. But all these things kind of, every year I do one just to see where I was, because you change all the time. So it was a kind of a barometer of what you were doing. And so if it was sculpture happening, I'd make sculpture. If it was a painting, it'd be painting. if I was at the coast, there'd be the coast in the background.
So here, when you were talking about Walla Walla and hot gluing everything together, I'm assuming this sculpture was probably pretty fragile before it was cast into bronze. So we're looking at a bronze sculpture that maybe weighs over 100 pounds easily and is very sturdy and strong. But in Walla Walla, in your studio there,
15 pounds.
it was much less. And same with this other Magnolia branch, again,
That's
bronze.
Charlie, this is pretty heavy, right, bro? It takes like a lot of people to move that
Yes.
thing. It's about this big, but man, it is heavy. And the original was like you could pick it up with one hand. So yeah, it changes.
And I love the relationship with sculpture and painting. And in this painting of hydrangea, you have a bronze figure. We were looking previously, most of the sculpture began as still life subjects. And then it evolves into the figure and the female figure. And I love the juxtaposition between these bronze works and the paintings. And very different feel, but here's a view of David's studio.
That's
at
my
Walla Walla.
playhouse. That's the studio in Walla Walla. Doesn't it look like somebody just went crazy in there? I mean, and the thing is it went way away from where I have ever been before. You know, I was in Washington State, working by myself in this room with some guys that are helping me move things around and stuff all the time. So the work kind of just was allowed to reinvent itself into something totally different. And that was good. If you wonder how things change or why you would paint a magnolia all the time, it's not because you have a great sales pitch for magnolias. It's because it's a subject that's really interesting to you that keeps coming back. It doesn't have anything to do with money. None of this, you know. And in fact, one of the reasons that I was sort of interested in not working so much anymore was because of how much the art world has turned to be about money, and how much it's turned to be about, fame and ownership and, all the wrong stuff. It's not what I got into it for. And I told one of my friends that, and he said, "When did you get this integrity and stuff?" So unlike you.
Oh dear, wait. So again, we're going to go through the same kind of evolution with an owl. Here we have it again in bronze. Or is that found? That's not found metal. That's bronze.
That's bronze.
Right, with patina and paint. And then just an incredible painting of the same subject.
That painting of that owl was painted right before Katrina. It was in 2005, right before Katrina. And it was right when it started, right when that happened. I was working on this painting, and I remember putting that mouse in its mouth, and I was thinking it's like nature. The storm didn't aim at New Orleans because it had a grudge against New Orleans any more than this owl has a grudge against mice. It's just what they do. And I thought it was really interesting to have a Katrina painting of this owl, and you'd be like, what's the connection? That's the connection. It's the same kind of deal. The nature could be so beautiful, like all the surroundings around him, and then it can be so not beautiful, so completely different. It's also about the loss of all this stuff. There's a lot of property that's just going away now due to, the world changing, climate change and stuff. So a lot of these places are going to be gone, and that's another good reason to have painted them.
So this is one of your most recent paintings from 2018, and the ibis and snake. And again, talking about kind of a return. We began in a way with Grassy Lake and ending with Grassy Lake with our conversation of if you follow David's work and you look at the work, you see a lot of the figures in the works from the 80s, the figure's very central. It's a very heroic person in the landscape. And in this last body of work that you've done, the figure gets very, very small. And unfortunately, I don't have an example of that. But it's a real celebration of, I think, the place. And of course, the danger here with the snakes. But it's it does think, in looking at the work and looking at 19th century painters, that David is in the tradition of American painting, clearly. And a lot of 19th century painters that went out into the landscape were desperate to capture it because of industrialization. They wanted to capture the beauty of America as they saw it was changing through industrialization. And there's no doubt we see a change in places like Grassy Lake, and Grassy Lake is changing. And David is documenting a really extraordinary place that may not be around forever. And I think it's kind of, what are your thoughts if this might be, that anytime you paint something, it could be the last time you visit a place, or that your desire to capture this, and I do see the figures shrinking in these compositions. The figure's really not what it's about. It's really about the majesty of the place. And can you speak to that a little bit as we wrap this up?
Well, the Texas coast, the Louisiana coast has changed. I've been fishing there for 30 years, going out in the marsh outside of there, and it has, through every different kind of thing, the oil spill, of course, and then, all the hurricanes and the roads cut through it. It just gets rolled back and rolled back and rolled back, and that's where all the little fish and everything grow. All the oysters and all the stuff that we eat. They're catching all the food that we eat, seafood, right there. I see it being done all the time, and it's really great to see that kind of thing happen. But then I can also see there's a lot of change in the last 30 years. But I think in that painting of the snake, I'm not real big on snakes. Snakes are not my friend. I've never, not too many snakes enjoy seeing me. And that's just an example of that snake taking a beating. But not me, by the birds, trying to defend their nest and stuff.
There we go.
And then down in the corner, there's an alligator waiting to find out what happens next. The alligator's going to win that deal. He's going to get a bird or a snake or maybe both. They're always present. Those alligators are always hanging around. I've been drawing there before, and I'll be leaning on the side of the boat, which is only about that far out of the water. And I had a pad of paper that was going like this in the breeze. And this alligator thought it was a bird flapping its wings. So it's like, 12-foot alligator, like right here. And I'm drawing, and I go, whoa, okay. And I just sort of try to ease past him, They're just all over that place. No, they're not afraid of anything there, so.
And then we have a grouping of Four Seasons paintings that you've never really done before. The spring, summer, fall, and winter of Grassy, looking at the same composition, the same place. You have done this with still lifes, in fact, so themes and variations, where you're looking at one composition and how many different ways can you paint the same thing.
Or how it goes bad in time, like a magnolia starts off, there'll be a couple of blossoms that haven't really come out yet, and one here, and then all of a sudden they're all going wild and turn brown and doing all this stuff. So the passage of time is really what this is about, and then each time you'd paint it due to what the weather was like, what the time and passage of time, I think, is really what this is about. I've always liked painting conch shells because it was about a time machine. You can put it up to your ear and you hear time. You hear the ocean. It's like, whoa. So again, it's another one of those little kid things, but you're like, that's the ocean, I'm pretty sure.
Well,
and then more passage of time.
And that brings us to the end. David, thank you so much for sharing.